Welcome to the Sanskaari Girls Podcast. I'm Vandita Morarka, and today we're talking about writing a disappearing world. How we document, witness, and remember landscapes and lives that are vanishing right before our eyes due to environmental degradation and climate change. Our guest today is Arati Kumar-Rao, a National Geographic Explorer. I must say, I was such a fan while growing up, and just to speak to someone who's done this is amazing. But yes, let me finish your bio. Environmental photographer, writer, and artist whose work Robert McCullin has called a tour de force, and I strongly agree. She's the author of Marginlands, Indian Landscapes on the Brink, which won Book of the Year at GreenLitfest and Publishing Next in 2024. Named to BBC's 100 Women list in 2023, she documents what she calls the slow violence of ecological degradation. Arati combines photography, long-form narrative, and art to chronicle what she describes as cataclysmic levels of environmental degradation across South Asia. Arati, welcome to the podcast. I want to start by talking about you. You grew up in Mumbai with a dad who didn't believe in owning a car. Reminds me of my father a little bit. Read Wendell Berry aloud, and took you bird watching on Sundays. Environmental consciousness seems to be very instilled in you early on in your childhood. But then, you sort of left. You did an MBA, you did a master's in education, you did an MSc in physics, and you worked at Intel. So, what is it that made you walk away from all of that and say, okay, I'm going to document landscapes with my camera? How did that happen?
Thank you, Vandita. Thank you for having me. And it's I don't. Yes. So the environmental consciousness, or the consciousness of the world around us, the natural world, was very much a part of growing up. Ever since I can remember, in our house, both mom and dad. Mom came from a botanist's family, so flowers and flora and trees, and trying to figure out any tree we saw, we'd try to figure out what it was. So, that kind of ethos was there in the house all the time. And of course, Papa was very Gandhian in his ways, and only wore khadi and only did not drive a car, which was sometimes, it was a little inconvenient for us, in the milieu where everybody around us had this. But it was great because Bombay was a place where you didn't need a car. Probably still is. And we lived in a wonderful colony, which was very green. And so my sister and I would go bird watching. And so it was something that was just, I would say, almost like a magical childhood, because we had the best of both worlds. We had a quiet, lovely, sylvan surroundings embedded in a big city. So the minute we stepped out, we had to go 33 kilometers to school, to college in Xavier, so all the way to town. And it was just a fabulous marrying of two absolutely different worlds. So that was, again, something just very ingrained. Conversations at home were all about things that were, again, environment related. My father was a part of the Save the Western Ghats March, the Narmada Bachao Andolan, so against big dams and all of that. We had people who were activists coming home, and I used to overhear their conversations and so on. So that stuff was always there in my mind. I always wanted to study physics or English literature. And at that time, growing up, you had to choose either you do science or arts. And I did choose science. But I think the writing and the English part, which is like my mom's influence, really was always there. And I got married really early. We went off to the US, and I was like, kind of before that, I did the masters in physics, all that. So there was like this wandering happening. I was really trying to figure out. I knew I had written. I think when I had graduated from college, in my diary, I had written that I always wanted to tell stories, and I always wanted to travel. The length of a river from the source to the sea. All those things were always, those things in my mind. But then I wandered a lot. In the US, I did join Intel. I was actually doing marketing for them. And so completely different. And so I did that for 10 years and then moved back to India. And there was a point at which I do describe in the book. I said, enough is enough of doing what I can do. And it's time to do what I want to do, which was basically storytelling. And when it was storytelling, it was actually a no-brainer that it would be environmental storytelling, just because of all the things that are happening around us, the documentation that needs to be done, and some of the some of the connections that need to be made, which I felt were being lost. And so it was not easy because I was in a different new city. I'd never lived in Bangalore before, didn't know anybody in the space. And so it was from scratch, literally starting from scratch, trying to figure out and find my feet in the space. But met a wonderful bunch of people along the way, wildlife biologists, environmentalists, journalists. Got really lucky, I must say. I have amazing mentors in all spaces, and that's when I knew the minute I gave up corporate life and started and made a mental note of doing this. There was no starting. This was just freelance writing, right? So you just hope that people will be interested in what you do. Um, I just knew that there was no going back. That not a single day have I regretted the decision of leaving corporate life at all. And this is what I would do, you know, come rain or shine. It's what it's what keeps me going.
That's really beautiful. And with what you started, so I will share that I grew up in Mumbai and I went to Sophia College, which means I also traveled the length of the city. Yes, I have. Yeah, I wasn't going to bring it up, but of course, the college I went to is better than Xavier's.
Of course, of course.
But I traveled the length of the city, and I ended up living close to RA. And there's this stretch on the railway when you cross Goregaon, when you cross RA, the air gets better.
Mm.
And all my life when I was younger, my father forced me into thinking about the environment. And I'll be honest, I could not. Like, even down to like recycling, reusing, being more sustainable, being more minimal. Um, I don't think it hit me as much as a child because the world I was inhabiting felt more abundant, which is not perhaps the greatest thing. But as I get older, and because I see the degradation, everything comes back as like, if only we cared more when there was abundance. And that's a feeling I really hold with me. Like, from like urban heat distress to just, entire marshlands being destroyed in Mumbai, it has had an impact. And it's something I did not realize. And I remember making fun of my dad. I remember like saying, why do you live like this? Why do you want to be like this? You're allowed some pleasures in life. And I think his question was always, at what point, like, what is your boundary for some pleasures?
Mm.
Who decides the some pleasures you're allowed? And I struggle with that, but I think I'm better with it now. So thank you really for sharing that. I loved
No,
hearing
and
how you've come into this.
thanks to people like your dad and my dad, they saw what was coming long before it came. And that's really the um sign of intelligence. Seeing something after it's come is hardly intelligent. But these guys knew what was right way back when. It was not
Yeah.
the buzzword, right?
There was no climate change conversation when my dad was growing up,
Right?
but he
Yeah.
just really cared about his natural environment. And I think that made a lot of difference.
It does. It does. Like
Yeah.
my father would built a solar cooker from scratch, and we would cook in that. But for us, of course, it was interesting. It was like an experiment. But we did. I was bought into it on some level. But yes, the conveniences of excess was not available to us. And that was kind of a little bit, at times we were like, But I think on some level, I knew that this was right. And I think you also probably knew this was right, which is why you are who you are today. Otherwise, you would have been on a completely different path.
Now, I'm going to follow up to that because I've also, like a lot of the people we've spoken with and even our community members, there's a lot of, I would say, conflict at this point, interpersonal conflict that people are carrying is capitalism means you really need money, right? Which means leaving stable work it's difficult. It's not a well-supported profession. So this is not like, I don't want to call it an advice question, but I think through your experience, a lot of our listeners can understand what does it mean to make this choice.
Mm.
And how do you like practically sustain yourself through such a transition?
Yeah, I think there is, I think the classic tussle between need and want, right? There are certain things that everybody needs to survive, and there is an enough. And I think when we recognize the enough, and that enough is sustainable, it's that then is your line, where you can live very comfortably without the excesses. And I think very, very clearly that is a line each one has to draw for themselves. What's enough for me is not enough for my husband. I see it every day, right? It's not enough for my daughter. It's not enough for my friend. Or what is enough for my father was not enough for me, right? So each one has to draw that line. And I think as long as it is something that is not excessive, um, it will hold, the line will hold. But clearly, if there is always one more thing that you want or you buy, like, so last year, this is not, I'm not virtue signaling here, but just doesn't, I just pushed myself to say, okay, you're not buying anything that is not necessary. Okay, in terms of luxury items. So I'm not talking about milk and food and stuff like that, but luxury items. And I failed once or twice. I did, kind of get carried away. But for the most part, my life was perfectly fine not doing those things. So then, if you're conscious of some of these things and if you're aware and you're trying to make conscious choices, I think you're good. If you're not sleepwalking through life, you're good. I think that's about what you can, say. And then, of course, there is injustice in the world. There is inequity, inequality, all kinds of things, right? If you're aware of, you fight for, just being aware not enough, you fight for, you raise your voice, you speak up against whatever it is, and you're doing that in line with your conscience. I think that's good. And it always, you I think as we grow older, we do get wiser. We realize we don't need so much stuff. I know so many people who are talking about saying we've just got too much stuff, right? Um, and I think that realization comes to each one at a certain time from within. It cannot be imposed. My saying, your saying, their saying, somebody else saying is never something that will be sustainable. If it comes from within and you start examining yourself, your life, even your own health, right? Do you need that peda? Do you need, all those things that are indulgences? You do become a little more mindful of the world around us and things. And so, yeah, it's so hard to not sound preachy in this space. But I think when it starts hurting you from within, that this is becoming a bit too much, I think it resets, and you come down to an equilibrium where you can sustain and you don't need to be excessive about things. Sorry, long-winded answer to your question.
I was just thinking of, this phrase, attune their senses, which comes up in some of your writing. And when you were speaking, I was thinking of that. There is a line you've written, which is, the land is still rich in ancient wisdom, and
Mm.
its cracks hold lessons that may yet aid us in undoing centuries of slow violence, as long as one is willing to attune their senses. And I think what you were speaking also about being mindful really spoke to me of that. Can you, translate that a little literally for us? How does one do that? When you were writing, what did this phrase mean for you then? And has that changed?
So I have the strange advantage of traveling to places where there is far less in terms of consumption as there is in a city or in my, I don't know, social strata, whatever, right? And that makes me intensely aware of privilege. And secondly, it makes me realize that there is the possibility of a more respectful world. And that comes only when you begin to see and appreciate the things that are quote unquote free, like birdsong, for example, right? Right now, you have bird song, you have fresh water, or you have uh, somewhat clean air. My God, I can't even say this anymore with a straight face. But I mean, even in places like Sundarbans, the AQI was 241. I mean, ridiculous, right? So I can't even say that with a straight face anymore. But when you start appreciating these things, you appreciate the intact assemblage of wildlife in a patch of land, or you appreciate how somebody is living with a patch of land, and very lightly, very lightly. Their carbon footprint is hardly anything. The way they take, the way they give back is all so harmonious, in so many ways. And then you start seeing you. So your ears, you start hearing, you start seeing, you start smelling, you start feeling, you start tasting things. You are fully aware. You are alive to the moment. You are not cocooned in an AC room or in an AC car or in an airplane or in any of those things, right? You're experiencing it with your body, with your feet, with your hands, with your skin. Uh, and then you realize that these are the things that you live for. You cannot live without clean air. You cannot live without clean water. You cannot live without a healthy land which is not contaminated by pesticides and industrial effluents. You cannot live without these things. You can live without a lot of things that are there in your house back home, right? And there's so much I feel that is that connection that we have lost, that connection to the land, to the earth, to the elements, that if we again attune ourselves to, um, you will find you need a lot less. You need a lot less. Walking with Paul Salopek across India with just a backpack for 3 months, you realized just how little of material stuff you need. I mean, so walking in any landscape, you realize how little you need, and it's a beautiful thing because it frees you. It frees you so much to just appreciate, understand, be grateful, because some of these things are truly free, as long as they're protected. And it also then makes you angry because some of these things are being taken away from you. So there is that, and then you have to curb that anger. There is also the sadness of the privilege where you realize that you can get away from places which are completely destroyed to places which are relatively better because you have the choice. Some people do not have the choice. And that irks as well. So there are so many things that bubble up, it's like a mishmash of emotions and feelings um, and just but I think again, coming back to the elements, coming back to your senses and being attuned to that is also a guard against feeling anxious about so many things that are happening in the world.
I really love that. I think when you were speaking, it automatically made me feel much more in touch. For a change, I'm also recording in a place that's really green because I'm not in Bombay. I'm in Bangalore and it's much greener. When you were speaking, and I was really thinking about this, you describe a lot of your work as documenting slow violence, a
Mm,
term from Rob Nixon, about environmental destruction that sort of happens so slowly and so out of view that suddenly you're waking up one day saying, what's happened? Because you've not noticed it because it's been so slow, it doesn't make headlines. And I'm really thinking even about the anger you spoke about, right? Like, how do you get people to be angry? How do you get people to use that anger as care um, and do something about it, right? Everything you spoke about, from erosion to groundwater depletion, all of these small incremental losses that we're perhaps not even registering as a loss.
mm.
How do you do that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it comes from experience. And I think
Mm.
when I was speaking to Yuvan Aves, if you guys have read Intertitle, it's an absolutely fabulous book that this young guy in India has written. A treasure. He's a national treasure, is what I call him. Um, he also said something which is something that I subscribe to, that experience, if you make a person feel, go out and actually feel it, experience it, they are much more likely to fight for it. And unfortunately, that feeling has come home to us in terms of like air quality. Once it started affecting us, we started screaming hell and high water, right? Once your child can't breathe, you scream. Whereas, of course, this is a slow build-up. This has been happening and happening and happening. And environment has always been seen as an obstacle, as something, laws to be whittled down, to be negotiated around, to be sidestepped. And when you do all of those things, what happens? You flout rules and you're allowed to pollute, and then that comes back to hurt you. People like your father, my father, have been saying this. They've been saying, look, just connect the dots because this is going to happen. You're not going to get away scot-free if you keep whittling away um, laws as well as safeguards. Right? It's that way with anything that could be dangerous, and it is coming back to hurt us. We are finding microplastics everywhere. We are finding pesticides in our food. We are finding air which is not breathable, water quality, especially in a place like Bangalore, where the groundwater is plunging to the depths, and it's 75% or 90% or some strange number like that is polluted. And you're thinking, oh God, now it's affecting me. I need to raise my voice. But it is something that has been building up. And there are some prescient people who have been screaming for a long time. But until it comes to us, until it comes to affect us, uh, we don't scream. And that is dangerous. And therefore, I think if you know, tell one person, let that person tell another person. Let it be something which organically also spreads through society, where people become aware um, of what can be, and reconnect with the land, with the elements, and so they know that when something is being polluted, it is going to come back to hurt us. And then, more than anger, action, I think, right? Anger without action is useless. You're just going to rant and rave and it's not going to go anywhere. But action is important. And when you feel it, you will fight for it. And I think that's really important, that people go out, people, even, I mean, I think tourism for that matter has such a wonderful opportunity to introduce people to what world can be and what world is coming to be, and make them aware of the opportunity to stop it even now, right? Even now is better than 5 more years of pollution, right? So we can do so much. I think it becomes a question of A, educating yourself, and B, doing something about it. Both are important. Doing something just for the sake of doing something, like tree planting, for example, without becoming educated and aware about what it uh, is is not a great option, and vice versa. Just not being aware and or just being aware but not doing anything is not a great option either.
So, are these something that I've been hearing through a lot of what you're saying is climate change is not equal, right, in terms of
Yeah.
how it affects us. Even the burden of caring and this burden of like suddenly, slowly realizing is something that is quite privileged.
Hmm.
Because for a lot of people, these are things they're realizing every day. They're
Yeah.
noticing it, they're feeling it daily. So, a couple of questions around that. I'm going to start by just one example of the work you're doing. You have a National Geographic grant that is documenting climate forced migration, right? And about 200 million people
Mm.
are displaced by environmental degradation. That's a staggering number. So, what does this look like? What does it mean to be forced to migrate because the environment around you can no longer support you? And who are these climate refugees? I remember long ago reading about even the Syrian crisis and how at the root of it is the need for people to migrate because their environment no longer supports them.
Yeah. um a great question. And this is a young kid, 18-year-old, 17-year-old kid asked me once, why do you bother with climate change when there are such pressing humanitarian crises all around us? And it was interesting because it made me just stop in my tracks to realize that that connection is not very clear to everybody. The connection that humanitarian crises are often driven by environmental degradation, including but not only climate change, including climate change, but not only climate change. And that's something that I'm finding in my current work as well, that quote unquote climate change is just one part of it. There is a whole lot of mismanagement on the ground, land use change for various reasons, etc., which is robbing people of traditional livelihoods and not giving them anything better. So traditional economists will probably say, hey, it's great. It's just a natural progression for them to leave agriculture, move to cities. Fine if the cities can offer them something. But look at the currently many places, not just India, in many places, the cities are not equipped for the influx, A, and B, the quality of life is not quite the same. In fact, there have been enormous number of cases where people have moved to the city and moved back because I'd rather get 10,000 rupees instead of 30,000 rupees, but be in a cleaner, more congenial environment, right? Almost every migrant I have spoken to so far has has a dream of returning. Nobody wants to stay. I mean, upping and leaving your home, leaving your roots and going to a completely different, possibly hostile, probably not very comfortable place is nobody's dream. The reasons people leave are also so different. Climate change, like you said, infinitesimal changes every day. It's supposed to rain today, didn't rain. These things calibrate their crops, calibrate their pasture lands, everything, right? And then one day it just buckets on you 3 centimeters of rain when in a place where you don't get any rain otherwise, and then you have landslips and so on. So unpredictable, so inconvenient, and so dangerous for those people who are living there that they are forced to up and leave to go to some place which is completely it's not a guarantee of anything better. In fact, I remember a lady coming up to me, a mother coming up to me in Bihar and said in Hindi, you asked us to, you as in the universal you guys asked us to, educate our children. We've put them through school and college. We've worked like crazy to get them through college. He has got a first BA degree and he has no jobs. And in all of this, he didn't learn fishing either from his father. So he's neither here nor there, right? And this kind of stuff happens for how many people, right? And so many things that are affecting the people who live closest to the earth, including climate change, but also loss of land, change in land use, and then of course, failed crops because of bad crop choices, which have been driven by economics, driven by people who told them, oh, this is what you need to plant, but not necessarily what the land said you needed to plant, all of those things. And so it's been very interesting trying to even tease apart what's going on. And 200 million is I think probably a conservative estimate. It's probably between 200 and 400 million of people who have at some point at least left their land, maybe to come back, but maybe to pinball across India and try to find a way to make ends meet. And so it's crazy, and the flip side, imagine if we had a way to keep those traditional lands viable, those traditional livelihoods viable. All of these people would have means to support themselves in many ways, probably not in ostentatious ways, but many of these people, you ask them, you're constantly told, oh, but they also want to move up. Sure, some of them do. But would they want to move up at the cost of a child being healthy, at a cost of a child being uneducated? Because where are the schools in some of these places? The schools are lost in, either bureaucracy or whatever. You don't have good education for a lot of these little kids who are migrant kids, right? So it's the whole thing. It's the whole picture. And until somebody sees the picture as a system, as a whole thing working, not just piecemeal pick up things and say, oh, don't think about this, don't let's talk about this, let's solve this one problem for now. It ain't going to work that way, because the whole reason we are in this mess is because we started doing that. We started cherry picking things and solving for certain things without thinking of downstream effects, upstream effects, and so on.
200%. I mean, while you were speaking, I was also thinking about there's just an entire group of people that are being forced into decisions that only look at the short term for them. Um, in doing so, damage the world around them and really leave them with no recourse, nothing to go back to at all. Like,
Correct.
it's not just that now young man can't go back to fishing. It's that in 20 years, perhaps there is no avenue left to fish, even if he were to learn how to do
It's already
fishing. Right?
happened. It's already happened. That same place, the
Hmm.
fish stocks have fallen by 90%, 95%. So there isn't. It's already there. The fishing is
Yeah.
also no longer viable. So even if he wants to come back home to fish,
Yeah.
that's a very, very poor option at this point. So yeah, and that's the reason why fishing has dropped, is also myriad and very, very interconnected to other things, other decisions made probably in the hallowed lands, the halls of Delhi. So it's so fraught, right? The question again comes back to being aware of all these things, keeping all these balls in the air and making decisions, knowing that each thing affects the other thing.
And it's in a way also really beautiful that these things are so symbiotic, that they need each other to survive. When
Yeah.
you're speaking, I'm thinking back to these few lines and something you emphasize in Marginlands. You emphasize on listening intently,
Mm,
which for me at least really comes through from how you're speaking of your experiences to inhabitants of these endangered landscapes, right?
mm,
Just really paying close attention to each fissure, fold, and ripple, as you've written. And you've also said that, you've documented what you would seem as misguided decisions, willfully ignored warnings, and disregarded evidence. And while you're speaking, I'm wondering if there are also questions of who's not listening. Why is like this traditional ecological knowledge being ignored?
yeah.
In a way, why is this evidence being disregarded? Is it because of who's presenting the evidence? So what's happening here?
Wow. Yeah, that is, I think there's a much shorter list of who's listening than who's not listening. I'm sorry, but everyone's not listening. Yeah, people who are making decisions are not listening. People who are unfortunately being bought into the decisions being made are not listening to their own traditional knowledge. Um, we who write about such things or amplify such things oftentimes are not listening to what's really happening. We're only listening to the symptoms of what's happening. Um, Nobody's listening. No one is listening. And truly, there are people who have amazing knowledge which will tide us through these times. They have the answers. The answers are there. And the ways to do it are there. Like, for example, very recently I was in the Sundarbans, and the Sundarban settled part, okay? So near Namkhana. And there they had a terrible, in 2021, they had a terrible cyclone, Yash. And because of that, they lost a lot, all their crops, okay? The only things that survived, all the hybridized crops, the green revolution, the GM crops, everything was gone because huge storm surges, right? Water came way over the head of the crops, and so everything was completely lodged in and completely gone, except two kinds of rice, both of them old traditional varieties of rice, which had the strength the next morning when the sun came up to stand up again. A few people, very few people, listened to that, realized that this is the stuff we need to save because these kinds of things are going to happen so many times, that now there is a small, tiny movement, very difficult to keep it from capitalism, very difficult to keep it from people who say, oh, but I want to do more of this so that I can earn more money. But to slow down and actually just save some of these things for the future and do it right so that they are not cross-pollinated and contaminated with things which won't work again in the future. So you have to slow down. You have to slow down. You have to do things small scale. You have to realize the value of what is known, because all of these things are known. And there are people who have known it. And there are those people who are passing on, that knowledge is going. And it's difficult to, if you have not already listened, to be able to get it back. But there are pockets all across India. I was in a place where Nagaland, where there are people who are saving some of these things. Western Ghats, people are saving some of these things. So there are, and this is only when I'm talking about agriculture, but there are echoes in all kinds of traditional livelihoods where there are means to survive in times of great drought or floods, because these people have seen it. The older people have seen this. This has happened before, and they know how to survive, how to tide over. And so some of these things, to slow down and listen and amplify, it's so important. But also to do it such that it's not taken over by vested interests, where it becomes again not available to the masses. And then it becomes just the purview of, oh, I can buy this absolutely organic black rice, which I will make as a risotto or something like that. And then, it's just something which becomes a purview of very few people, and it's lost to the masses. Masses are the ones who grow it and need it and whatever, right? So there are various aspects to this. And it's also gendered, extremely gendered, some of these things. Like the out migration that we talked about, it is often that it is the men who up and leave. They are forced to go out. It's not easy for them either, but they are more likely to get up and go and look for a job in a city or even in the next town or the next village. I know of people who are going from very rural village in North Karnataka to very rural other village in North Karnataka doing construction work from Orissa, for example, right? So very, very, it's not easy. It's not an easy life at all, even for the men once they leave. But imagine the women that are left behind, the children that are left behind. They do not have any support. They do not have financial or health or educational support. Some of the instruments, the state instruments that are supposed to help, say villagers or farmers, etc., are not available to women. Because it's maybe in the name of the husband, whatever, right? And so the burden of supporting a family is on the woman. And then climate change, as well as land use change, land acquisition, all of that affects the woman also disproportionately, in a disproportionate manner. And then the child, there's high levels of malnutrition in India, undernutrition in India, both with children as well as with women. And there are those very systemic issues which then start showing up in a very gendered way as well. Um, and it's hard. It's really hard. And there are people who are speaking about it, but the people who can make a change, can make policy, are probably not listening in the way that is truly beneficial. Unless there's a benefit to a certain group of people, it's not necessarily adopted. So it comes down to who's in power, whose voice is being heard. And those voices currently which are being heard are not necessarily the ones that will be useful in the future.
100%. While you were speaking, I was thinking of a project we did around climate brides. And I think there's a really popular podcast or knowledge repository around it as well. And the gendered impacts are intergenerational, right? Like there are women left behind who are then responsible for everything without anything to their name. Like most farmers in India are women, but they
Yeah.
don't own land.
Yeah.
When their husband dies, they will not get that land. And they will then become dependent on the mercy of another man and often are subjected to increasing sexual and gender based violence
Absolutely.
when that generational shift or when that, passing on happens.
Absolutely.
At the same time, their daughters are married off because in Bombay, in Maharashtra, for example, there was this water wives thing where men were marrying multiple women because they needed to send one woman to just bring water. and water was so far away that it was a person's full-time daily job to just go collect water. And there are, yeah, it's just, it's never ending, no, the gender generational cycle. I was also thinking back to the other part you mentioned about like black rice becoming like a popular thing, and I saw that happen with avocado. I saw that happen with millets, things that were, and often when they're the food of the poor, like millets, they were looked down upon, they were treated a certain way, they were not cool to eat, and they've sort of been rebranded. But now those who ate it as part of their everyday life can no longer afford it.
Afford it. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Changing their diets and changing how their body then interacts with their environment, because you know your diet regulates your body heat, like not going into that, but it's just, it's so insidious. And everything you're saying, it feels, you know what you said, like you have to be able to throw all the balls up in the air and look at all of it together, because it really is this interconnected.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is interconnected. I mean, it's you think that what is happening in Bengal is not affecting you. It definitely is. You think something that's happening in rural Jharkhand is not affecting you. It is. You know, you may not see it right now, but it is going to come back to very much affect you at some point, if not immediately. So, yeah.
100%. Yeah. No, thank you for that. I mean, it's helping me make connections in my brain that I think have remained isolated incidents, and really also seeing the generational damage we're doing, the damage perhaps popular culture is doing. So lots to like unpack here. I'm going to come back to a question to you on a theme that's very prominent in a lot of your work, which is around land acquisition for industry, which has also been a big driver of where some of this has happened, right? How common, especially common physical lands shrink, people are displaced for development projects. And you've written about how unthoughtful development, short term interventions often undermine the very innate resilience of the land.
Hmm.
And I think perhaps also of its people, right?
Yeah.
There's a tension there between
Yeah.
development
Yeah.
and the idea that it's supposed to improve lives
Yeah.
and the destruction it causes. I'll also give an example. Something that I experienced was there were these entire village bastis that were displaced for development. And there were interesting questions that came out, interesting and unfortunate, that there are some jobs that have no purpose in a city.
Mm.
Like there was a man who would go around village to village on his cycle sharpening knives.
Mm.
But even just the culture of a city is when your knife is dull, you you throw it away and you get a new one.
Mm.
You do not sharpen your knife.
Mm.
So your culture and environmental consciousness, as
Mm.
someone, at least even me, as someone who dwells in a city, now what is that man supposed to do? Because
Hmm.
nobody goes down to get their knife sharpened.
Yeah.
So it's again so interconnected. So I'm curious, how do you navigate this tension? Like, you know, there's so much to be said. Oh, you're anti-development. You don't care about progress. I think you started by saying some of that as well. So how do you balance this tension and perhaps even reshape the meaning of development?
Yeah, I think that's where you start. You start with what is development. If development is not resulting in better health, better prospects, better uh, education for your country as a whole, not for the few, how is that development? And can we take an honest look? And this is not about a party or about the last 10, 15 years. Just look at our history, right? Even over time, the decisions that have been made, how have they really improved in the long term? In the long term, very important to say that, okay? In the long term, the lives of Indians. If you look at some of the decisions that were made during the Green Revolution, sure, it served a short time purpose, but we are still reaping the terrible mess that it left behind, right? And that was because it did not take the long view. And even in terms of land acquisition for something that's really worrying me right now is, for example, green energy, right? Isn't that seen as the panacea for climate change? And yeah, you get out of the fossil fuels and you get into green energy. But how? How do we do this? How do we A, make the transition, but B, even how do we have that kind of installed capacity of renewables without destroying biodiversity, without destroying livelihoods, without destroying the land itself, right? It cannot be trading one for another, because that's the flavor of the decade, or that's the UN whatever of the year, right? You cannot, uh, you cannot be that short term, because being short term is why we are where we are right now. Looking at things short term is why we are where we are right now. And if you know certain things, if you know, if there are scientific studies that have been done to show that certain things haven't worked, like growing rice in Punjab is not working. It has not worked. It has done terrible things to the groundwater level, right? There are places where it was traditionally millet land, right? Um, you can't expect to get away with it long term. The land remembers. It remembers. It will return to its nature. And if you spoil it, it's not going to be forgiving at all. It's going to become saline, and then for years you're not going to be able to do anything, right? And we're seeing that. We're seeing that translate into abject debt for farmers, suicides, all of that, right? I mean, it's just look at how we have not taken the long view and see where it has landed us. And unfortunately, more and more, the short view is so lucrative for so many people that it's inconvenient to take the long view. And I really don't see things changing unless there is some way of understanding how we can truly get out of this. Marketing campaigns and slogans and eyewash will only work for maybe very, very little time before you realize, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And but by then those people will have moved on from power, or their lives haven't been disrupted. It's the people who live closest to the land whose lives are disrupted, and they are disrupted for years, years, right? I have whole chapters dedicated to this unfortunate bad news, relentless bad news of how things that happened in the 70s, we are still paying the price for. And we who, not you and not me, but there are millions of people along the Ganges, along the Ganga, who are paying the price for very, very bad decisions, very bad ecological decisions, which turned out to be bad economic decisions. Until people realize that ecology is the bedrock of your economy, nothing is going to change. And if you think that you can have great GDP in spite of spoiling the land, you are grossly mistaken. Yeah, I think as long as you're in power, maybe it will be so, but further down, it's going to become completely, truly a wasteland. And wasteland itself is a fraught thing, and I think I need to just qualify that. There is no such thing as a wasteland in nature. Scrubland, all of that, which is currently called wasteland, which is why it's given over to the green energy companies, is not wasteland. It's highly productive ecosystems. But by the time modern civilization is done with it and it's saline and it is completely unproductive, it's going to be a dust bowl, which is then that's when it's going to be a wasteland. And then it'll be very bad for the country, even for GDP terms. Nothing, you can't. I always say this in many of my talks, but I think it's worth reiterating. But it's this thing, this quote by Aldo Leopold, where he says civilization has so cluttered the elemental man earth relationship with gadgets and middlemen that awareness of it is growing dim. We imagine industry is what supports us, forgetting what supports industry. you know and that the land that supports industry, to take care of the land so that industry thrives for long, is something that is not part of our ethos right now.
That was really powerful. Thank you for that. And I think it's important. It's said many, many times. So it really sinks in. Um, I think we really forget what we owe our existence to. And it's never a bad idea to be reminded. Yeah. Yeah. Even the other things you mentioned, it feels like we're articulating into existence our demise, right? By giving names to things before they are that, like calling something a wasteland and then progressing to make it a wasteland. So you can be like, yeah,
Exactly.
look, I told you. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
thank you for that. Before I come to the next question, there's also something you said about inconvenience. And because I know that we have a lot of urban podcast listeners, something that's come up in a lot of episodes, and maybe I want to reiterate here is that inconvenience is the cost of community. And if you see yourself in community with nature, it will sometimes be inconvenient, but so what? Like sometimes I don't want to cook for a friend who's sick, but I will do it. I'm inconvenienced, but I will do it. But what if we saw ourselves, and this, and maybe it goes back to the divide you're speaking of, right, with the middlemen and the gadgets. If you saw the environment we occupy as part of our community, then we wouldn't mind being inconvenienced for it.
Absolutely. And the environment is around us, it supports us. I mean, I think the very othering of the environment that has come to be in language, right? Just recently, I saw something with saying that pollution is not just an environmental issue anymore. Excuse me? What do you mean by just an environmental issue? I think that whole mentality of thinking environment is something else, we live, our lives are something else, is the root cause of all of this, right? It's we are surrounded by, we are propped up by, we prop up, we affect this interconnection of the environment, the world around us. And us is so elemental, right? That is, I just don't, I think you and I clearly, I mean, now hearing about you and your dad, I think we were really lucky to have the education we had growing up. That grounding of how we are not different from the land. We have to protect the land for to be protected in return. That very, very strong ethos, that ethic, that land ethic of community, of being with something, not in spite of, not over, not above, not under, nothing. You're with community. And if you look at any ancient culture, Vandita, any Adivasi group, if you look at any group that lives close to the land, community is everything for them, even today, right? I was in, like I mentioned, Nagaland very recently, and this is a small village where the women are in charge of the seeds and the agriculture, etc. And for them also, community is everything. Everybody will come together to save one person, or one person will save another. I mean, it's like, it's so thick, it's so strong, it's so important. And unfortunately, that's what they're seeing is being eroded with individualism, you know? And instead of, I think that's one of the worst quote unquote gifts of capitalism, individualism, where you think you are separate from anyone else at all. You're not separate from anyone. You really aren't. You are a community. And again, you know, Aldo Leopold has said something about land. If you don't see land as a commodity, it's because we see land as a commodity, air as a commodity, water as a commodity, something that is a resource, right, to be mined, etc. That then puts you above that thing, right? It gives you the power to extract that thing. However, if you see yourself as belonging to a community of the land is a community that you belong to, or the waterways, everything are communities that you belong to, that you depend upon as much as it depends upon you to take care of it. Um, your whole your whole thinking, the way you would make policy, everything would change if you just recognized that you guys are all one. There's no one above the other here. There's no one who's more powerful than the other here. In fact, if anything, the land is the most powerful. And you want to be in commune. You want to commune with all of these creatures and the land to be able to survive. So you're absolutely right. I think community is a is what we have lost both in city living as well as in as well as in modern civilization, I think, Western civilization, whatever it is. Because anything, if you go into any older civilization, anybody who lives still according to the ways of their ancestors, um, for them, every one of them, it's community above all.
I hear you. And a lot of what you're speaking to is making me think of very like masculine ideas of ownership, which have connotations of plunder, of leaving a mark, of feeling like this is privately held by me. That's taking me to a question on gender. You know, you mentioned the gendered aspects of climate change and what that does to women. But I'm also curious that when you're gathering knowledge and when you're sense making from the knowledge that communities hold, what has it been like to talk to women? Right? You've talked about how men always want to come and tell you, look, these are my problems. Even when you try to talk to women, I think you've mentioned that they're always sort of around you.
Have I already mentioned that? Because that's
In your
something that
interviews, yes.
it's something that I'm so cognizant of that for this project, the migration project, because oh my God, when I look at my notes in for Marginlands, it's always the men speaking. God, so hard to even hear a woman's voice through that. Even when you hear her speak, she's saying what the men have said or saying or said to her, or, you know, the whole thinking, there has been no original thought for a long time because they have not been allowed to think. They've not been allowed to make decisions for themselves. I remember a lady struggling to tell me what her favorite food to cook was. The only thing she said is, whatever they want. I was like, no, I'm asking you what your favorite food is. No, whatever they want, I'll make. What is your favorite food? What would you make if you didn't have to cook for anyone else? She didn't have an answer. Silence. She had never thought about it. Right? And that kind of stuff where it's usually the men speaking. And you have to really look for women. Again, that comes down to time, slowing down. You have to slow down, give yourself time so that you can go make yourself friends, make them feel that you're really invested in their lives, which you should be, not just go there for a story. They're not subjects. All of those things I hate. But if you feel like you can, if they feel like, hey, they can trust you and you are there to really understand what their life is like, that's when they start opening up. That's when you get beyond the sound bites and you start listening and hearing what a woman's life truly is. It's very rare, very hard to do. Just given the way the world is built, even the laws, everything are made by the men. You're taken around by the men. Your driver will be a male. Your guide will be a male. It's just so hard. But I think we have a unique advantage in that, Vandita, where because we are women, we can, if we want to, go and sit in the kitchen, just park ourselves there, talk to people, be where the women are, be in the fields where the women are, talk to them. I've done that most recently with a few women farmers, just following them around, seeing how they see the land. And oh my God, how they see the land. They know every leaf and what it can do and what it can feed and what it can cure and what you should never touch. You know, that knowledge, that amazing knowledge of how to keep health, keep family, keep the whole community going, that is immense, that knowledge among women. And it's a treasure. And if you can tap into that treasure, I know that the biggest thing for me is that I grow so much learning from just being with women everywhere I go. It's hard though. It's really hard to get to them.
100%. I think it's hard. It's sometimes also challenging for me for my own biases and the anger I feel, and sometimes the anger I want to project onto a situation that I don't have that authority to.
Yeah.
So, one is to sit with the woman in the kitchen, which is something I've learned now. And I remember initially, because my family comes from a small town of Rajasthan, the anger being, why are the women in the kitchen? And creating a problem that's going to be 10 times worse once I leave because perhaps nobody will say something to me, right? Because I'm
Mm.
protected by the men in my family, or by the men who are like working as the, the guide, the driver, the professional layer between me and a community that I may be joining. So it's been a bit of an interesting learning, and also about like meeting women and meeting people where they are.
Mm.
And what you say, even about what women are noticing and documenting and using in their lives, is so different. Because on a complete tangent, I was reading a magical realism sort of book, and it spoke about how the original magicians were women, but the purpose of the magic was not unfettered growth. The purpose of magic was to keep your community safe and healthy.
Mm.
So you understood magic as medicine, you understood magic as nourishment. And that's what's coming to me when you speak, because women who till lands are thinking of that land and what it gives them as a way to keep their families and communities safe and
Yeah.
healthy and
Yeah.
cared for.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for
And
that.
yeah, I think everywhere you go, you realize that, you know, the welfare of the family, the welfare of the community, the welfare of the land, the welfare of the water body, because she knows so much that she depends upon all of this and the family depends upon this, is protected by the woman. And I'm not saying this as a feminist or anything. It's just uh, the way it is, because the responsibility of the family is on her. The responsibility of food is on her. The responsibility of health is on her. It's a heavy, heavy cross to bear, very heavy cross to bear. And but she does it because she knows that that is also her own health, her own mental well-being is if the child and if the parents are fed and if the field is giving and is very good, then everything is better for her as well. So it's both mental and physical body health that
Yeah.
she cares about.
Yeah. No, truly. Thank you for that. I mean, yeah, today has gotten me thinking about many, many things in different ways. So I'm going to come to one question that's really stayed with me for a while about your writing is, in Marginlands, you write about standing on the brinks, on the bank of the Brahmaputra in about late February and seeing that there is no water in it, only sand.
Hmm.
And, you've documented the river and sort of like been with it for years, from 2014 onwards. What does it feel like emotionally to return to that same place, watch something degrade? And how have you've like held witness to this loss over time, right? But today when I speak with you, there isn't any despair, there isn't numbness. um so where is
No,
all this hope coming from, at least from what I can see? Where is this anger, hope, care coming from? What keeps
there
you
is
going?
no numbness at all. Every single time I see the Brahmaputra, I tear up. I It's a very emotional experience, and that sand is because it's February. It's supposed to be silt. It's supposed to be low time. It's supposed to be that, and then it breathes. The whole place breathes. The whole landscape breathes because in monsoon it's a different. Kind of cadence of things that are happening in dry times. It's a different cadence of things. So that's kind of nature, right? I mean, how it renews itself. It kind of exhales and then it inhales and then it exhales and it's beautiful. And I think noticing those things and being alive to the beauty, not beauty, to the aliveness, to be alive to the aliveness. I guess I'm not being very articulate here, but aliveness of these things like rivers and forests, even a tree, even a blade of grass, whatever, right? Is It's very rejuvenating for me. If I'll share with you after this um, a photograph. I was cycling in my community, an insipid, very very manicured community in Bangalore. I was cycling and I came upon this patch of land, which is some plot which nobody has built on, and has got some grasses growing in it. And the evening light was catching the grass, and it looked so beautiful, so beautiful. And even among this manicured thing, there was this wild thing growing and reflecting the sun and in its pink and red resplendence. Even though I knew that this is not a native grass, in the back of my mind, I just enjoyed its beauty and I saw the butterflies were having fun. It was just so nice, you know. And when you're just in the moment. I think that's the thing about everything around you. If you're in the moment, that despair of the world, which is such a big thing, which can just completely bring you so down, it vanishes because you're in the moment, you're enjoying that grass. You really don't know whether you have the next moment. You don't know what's going to happen, right? But that in that moment, that grass, that sunlight, and that butterfly come together, and you're like, wow, right? So that wonder, I think, in the tiniest things, the wonder when you're taking off from Guwahati and you just see that enormous writhing creature, that crazy um, river called Brahmaputra. Beautiful, beautiful creature. If you just see it and you're like, oh my God, you know, and you know what it looks like when you're standing on its banks, right? You know what it looks like up close, but it's absolutely beautiful even from up high, upon high, right? And you just stay with that moment. If you stay with that moment, I think a lot of that despair, which can feel like a lot when you look at things in totality, in the moment, it kind of vanishes for that second. And then you just live moment to moment, knowing that you're doing the things that need to be done. You need to raise your voice. You need to do all of those things. Those things are happening. But in the moment, there is immense beauty in the world around you.
Arti, I must say, you really made me see our world as though it holds more magic than I thought it was possible of holding. So, just really, really beautiful. Thank you. I have never seen the Brahmaputra. Um, yeah, I live in a very different part of India.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
No, no, true. I pushed myself, right? In 2014, I just
yeah,
upped and went and I just took a small hotel room in the basement of a hotel. It was like crazy. And I was just, I was like, I got to learn about this landscape. I had never been there before, but I just parked myself and met people. And there were people who showed me so many things. It was just beautiful. And then that river, oh my God, it is something else. It is really, it's a creature unto itself. It's mad. It's a mad creature. It won't be tamed. And all these people planning to build dams, my God, I just hope that the better sense prevails. It's just disaster, unmitigated disaster waiting if they do that.
Mm. Yeah, you really made it come alive for me, and I'm sure for everyone listening in. I could visualize it as you spoke, and yeah, really good luck to those who try to curtail or damage not just the Brahmaputra, but even other
Anything.
parts
Yeah.
of our environment. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
going to fight
Yeah.
back. No, so before we end, one final question, and please feel free to add anything that maybe you want to talk about, but we've missed asking you. I'm curious to know who are the environmental writers, photographers, artists that work in South Asia that you have been engaging with and that you think our listeners should be following as well.
Oh, Yuva Naves, I spoke about him immediately. That comes to mind. He's amazing, amazing, amazing. And he's got that sense of wonder. He takes little children around to, on walks, insect walks and whatnot. And he just ignites wonder. And that is such an important thing, right? So anybody with that kind of wonder in yourself can light these fires, which are so important. So Yuva Naves for sure. Neha Sinha is out with a new book, Wild Capital, which is about the nature in Delhi, and I'm waiting to read that. And that's going to be a lot of fun. Um, there are oh my God, there are so many people. There is a guy called Raza Kazmi who writes about the history of India's wildlife. We had him on our podcast, and oh my God, everything he says and everything he writes about, I just hang on to every word because there's so much interesting stuff. I'm a history buff. Anybody who's an history buff, his works are amazing. In terms of filmmaking, I love films made by Kalyan Verma. He has an amazing aesthetic and also a good grounded guy who very much steeped in community, so conservation and community. So good stuff there. But people, I've stood on the shoulders of giants, wildlife biologists like Aprajita Datta, T.R. Shankaraman, Divya Mudappa, people from Nature Conservation Foundation, naturalists like Harsha J. and Payal Mehta. Harsha and Payal are conducting nature guiding workshops. And they are the best. Even if you don't want to become a nature guide, but you want to know how to read nature, it's an amazing workshop to take. And those guys are amazing. They're old pals of mine. And I just learn so much every time I'm with them. It's just fantastic being with them. Harsha and Payal, those guys are great. Look out for Nature Guides Academy. I think that's what their outfit is called. Pradeep Krishan, if he comes out with any field guides, pick it up because it's done beautifully. He has Trees of Delhi, of course, but even more interesting and beautifully done is Jungle Trees of Central India. Fabulous stuff. Field guides are so important, and he is amazing. And if I come up with more, I will shoot you guys a note. Please include it in the show notes. People are going to kill me for not remembering them at this point.
No, we'd love to add more people in. I think this is also such an unexplored area when we think of feminism, and it's really important for us to be able to bring it together. And I know that our listeners and even our member base would be very excited to explore this. Before this site, like this membership, we ran a pilot test where we did climate as the theme.
Mhm.
So we looked at only reading books on climate, environment, feminism, ecofeminism, and the response was fantastic because people felt so, I think, disconnected with the world around them, and they needed something to help them make sense of that world. And I think that's
Mm.
what, like, everything you've mentioned, but your writing, your work also does for people, right? It helps them make sense and believe that, of course, an alternative is possible and that they have a role to play in that alternative. Yeah.
We
But
all do. We
yeah,
all do. Yeah,
be very
definitely.
happy to add everything. But Arti, thank you so much for this conversation. It's taught me so much. It's helped my brain like explode many times and like taught me to think of how we document, remember, and also fight for a world that's disappearing, and showing us really that to witness um, wonder is an act of care, and that beauty can coexist with rage and urgency. Really, thank you.
Absolutely. I
Um,
think you said it far better than my rambling.
You were amazing. Thank you. And for listeners, Marginlands, Indian Landscapes on the Brink is available from Macmillan in India and from Milkweed Editions internationally. You can also follow Arati's work on Instagram at Arati Kumar-Rao. We'll put it in our show notes as well. We were so excited to have you. And this has just been such a, I think, heart and soul warming conversation.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Vandita. It's been absolutely a pleasure speaking with you. I love the questions, and I hope your listeners go out there and enjoy this wonderful world of ours and fight for it too.
I think they definitely will. Everyone listening in, this has been the Sanskaari Girls Podcast. I am Vandita. A big reminder to follow us on Instagram, sign up for our membership, it's free, and subscribe to our newsletter. As always, shout out to Anjali on production and scripting, and Kuhu for all their support and overall coordination. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep finding new ways to make your voice heard through the written word.